and record on the computer. All right, well, welcome back. It is July 19th. We're up at 13 now. I've lost my pen. So we've got a few more sessions left. What we're going to do today is I've got some announcements to talk about at the top that I'll segue into briefly in just a minute, and then we'll do some fallacy of the day stuff. Another really great day of fallacies. And then in the second half, we'll talk about the New York Times editorial board versus a guy named Tucker in a bow tie. About whether or not the gig economy is a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's manipulative or non-manipulative, to various degrees of success. We'll talk about what's going on in those arguments. Before I go too much further, Misty, I did get your email, and I didn't mean to make you wait in apprehension all day, but I got really busy. Do you have a minute to talk after class about your schedule?
Yes, I do.
All right, fantastic. We can talk about it then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the first thing I want to talk about is the drop deadline is coming up. If you are in class currently today, you probably don't have anything to worry about. But there are definitely some people that are nominally enrolled in the class that haven't seen or heard from in quite some time by now. If you are interested in withdrawing from the class, know that the drop deadline is going to be next Monday, the 25th. I don't know what time the cutoff is. The college closes at 5. I think you can drop the class all the way up to 11:59 p.m. that day. Don't quote me on that. But just know that if you want to drop the class and you're seriously considering that, you might want to talk to your academic advisor. It might affect your statuses in some way. Maybe reach out to me and maybe we can discuss strategy for how to get you back afloat in these last few weeks. But if you are going to drop the class, I would highly suggest doing it before the drop deadline. The 24th is a good rule or guideline to let guide your decision. That if you really go past the 24th, like you're kind of playing with fire, if you're trying to go like right up to the last minute on it, because you might not be able to withdraw. Otherwise, a couple of assignment notes coming up. The research draft is due this Friday. I have been sort of going through my backlog of assignments, and I'm pretty caught up now. I think I have a few analysis of emotion revisions to address, but I got through any outstanding revisions on the research proposal, a lot of the backlog of discussion boards that I just needed to apply grades to, not today's, but I think I'm done with the ones from last Thursday. And then I have about 7 analysis of credibilities left to grade, and I should have those done for you by Thursday. And I'm so confident that I'll have them done by Thursday that I'm going to tell you now. You can hold me accountable to that, and I will have them done by Thursday. I should also have the rest of the analysis or the revisions from the last analysis done by then. I think there's like 4. And I don't think they originated with people that did extensive revision, so I might actually be able to get through those pretty quickly. Then next Thursday, we start the presentations. So you're definitely going to be looking forward to building that presentation. I will have by this Thursday, so by next class period, I will have the schedule of assignments published, or the schedule of presentations published. I'm basically just going to go in alphabetical order down the list and assign people. We'll start on the first day, and everybody's turning it in on the same day, so everybody should be ready to go on that day. And we'll just go from there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on Thursday. Last thing, next Friday, you've got the analysis of the appeal to reasoning or rationality. That's going to be due. That's our last major assignment that you need to turn in, although there are discussion threads that are going to run all the way until next Thursday. So be on the lookout for those. And that basically covers all of the important stuff coming up. Does anybody have any questions about any assignments coming up, the calendar, anything that you'd like to bring up now before we move on to something else? Oh, there's stuff in the chat. So we'll just read our paper and then the next person will go. It's less just reading your paper and it's more, you're creating like a condensed like summary presentation out of like, you know, PowerPoint or Google Slides. And you're putting like the most essential important content on those slides, right? You're not going to get a chance to like read your whole paper. I think even if you read your paper from beginning to end, it would take probably more than 5 minutes to read that 1,000 words out loud. So what you're doing is you're just kind of addressing those concerns in the prompt for the research presentation and using your slides as kind of a backboard off of which you'll point out some things, and you're eventually going to sort of walk us through your paper and walk us through the main points and some opposition you might have encountered or something like that. But it's a little less like reading your cold reading your paper from start to finish, and more just kind of like walking us through different important points. Does that make sense? Great, good to hear, Bailey. After you present, yes, you do need to stay. Unless there's something that you absolutely have to get to, it's just like another, it's just like any class. We will like have a short, I'll ask you a follow-up question after you present, and that might lead to a short discussion maybe in between each of the presentations. I want to kind of keep them tightly focused, but I am kind of expecting like we're all presenting and we're all seeing it together. We're all like sort of a part of it. I may have asked this, but need a refresh. Are we verbally citing on our presentations? Is there an MLA format you're expecting? Not necessarily, right? As far as verbal citation, just mentioning the source out of which it came, right? You don't have to be like in the Jordan source on page 49, paragraph 3, the author states, right? You can just sort of weave it a little bit more organically into the way that, in the Jordan source, the author states, Jordan says this, things like that. Heard, thanks. Exact date the presentation start. They will start on the 28th. And we'll jump right into them. I'll probably do like a brief framing and setup on the 28th, and then we'll just basically start with the first presentation and we'll go from there. And I want to say that I think I'm blocking off, like, I'll give you a little bit of time to set it up, open your file, be able to make sure you're sharing your screen and everything's good on your end, and then you'll go and I'll start the timer. And I will give you a light when you're getting within a minute of your time. And then when I give you the second light, when I say the light, I mean like I'll probably just hold up a note card that says, hey, and start wrapping it up, right? That first note card, it's it's time to put a bow on it, and then when the second note card hits, like get to the end of the point you're making, and then we'll end it there. That way we can keep them on a pretty strict schedule going through them, and I can give that gives us enough time to sort of respond and talk about things, and then also give the next person time to set up, and then they'll go, and then we'll just kind of proceed like that. All right, good questions. Anything else? Fantastic. All right. Let's talk about fallacies. All right. Oh. Here. So a couple of really good funny ones that I would like to start off with. A couple of new ones. There's always a couple of different ones that we haven't really covered, and those are the ones that I like to front and pay attention to. But I do want to start with one that we've covered before in general, but we haven't had too many examples of socorro, the hasty generalization. Just to be clear, he is chocolate. That is what's going on here. Oh yeah, scandalous content also, warning.
When a cold chill begins to burn at your very soul, that's the sweet touch of love. Oh, when just a drop of a name begins to sting your very toe, that's the sweet touch of love. Oh yes it is. Just the thought of not seeing you would blow my mind. Oh, that's the sweet touch of love. Oh yes it is. I was about to give up, but you came just in time with your sweet touch of love. Oh yes.
Okay, I've never seen that one before. That was that was wild. I don't know what year that aired, but I don't remember. I haven't seen that version of Axe in a long time. I'm also not looking for Axe on a daily basis, but I think you're spot on with this idea of the hasty generalization, right? The idea being that, you know, not all women surely think that chocolate is so irresistible that if a man were suddenly made of it, they would just assault him sexually nonstop in the streets, right? Sort of leads to the idea that, hey, this is okay, which is also a little bit problematic and normalizing. But I thought that was a really good example of, I mean, Axe, a frequent offender on the list. You know, Axe and DirecTV and Allstate as Mayhem commercials are all sort of jockeying for position on most humorous, fallacious appeals. But I really like that one. Following that up, I think Mike's missing the point fallacy with Peloton is, again, trigger warning or racy content alert.
Apparently, some people think the way I work out is strange. Honestly, I don't get it. Me, I don't think using the Peloton app is strange at all. Sure, they're famous for their amazing equipment, but the app gets me motivated to do lots of different workouts, like yoga, cardio.
I like, notwithstanding, I like how the statue of David is also censored.
Cardio, meditation, and strength training.
You okay back there? You want me to call somebody?
I even use the app for running. Now, does that seem strange to you?
In the Peloton community, users are represented by two separate yet equally motivated groups: those who wear pants and Christopher Maloney.
So, yeah, I didn't know that he had done a commercial like that. That's hilarious to me. Also, put a pin in that because I feel like Christopher Maloney's body toning is going to come back up in a minute when we talk about the definition of the word jacked. But Mike, I think you're absolutely right. This is missing the point, right? Like, he clearly misses the point. Like, it's not the fact that he's using the Peloton app that seems strange. It would be that he's running around doing everything naked, which would be a little bit, you know, socially unacceptable, to say the least, right? Maybe not everywhere. There are parts of Austin he could go to hippie holiday. But generally speaking, you know, running through the park naked, clad only in a pair of running shoes, is liable to get you an indecent exposure charge. But also then at the end there, we've got the false dichotomy, right? There are two kinds of Peloton users. There's people that wear pants and there's Christopher Maloney, which, you know, strictly speaking, probably other people also exercise in the nude, like, especially if they're at home. I don't know. That stands to reason to me. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe this commercial is the only instance ever of somebody doing that in the nude. Ancient Greeks, I don't know. They're all dead now, but you know, they did a lot of nude exercise. So I think in addition to the missing point, maybe a little bit of a false dichotomy there. This one I really enjoyed. Carrie, the Suburban Auto Group, and I'm not going to play this whole one. Yeah, I was really taken aback by the overt sexualization in today's fallacies, right? They've steadily gotten racier in content. This one I found really funny. It's an 8-minute supercut of all these different commercials. I'm not going to play them all, but it is a really fascinating look into the Suburban Auto Group.
The Trunk Monkey Theft Retrieval System. Because sometimes getting your car back is simply not enough. Another revolutionary idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
Isn't that dark? The monkey killed and hid the body. So I think it's important to remember to keep in mind, we'll watch a couple more of these, but it's, remember that this is an auto group, right? This is a car dealership, right? The purpose of the car dealership is to sell more cars, right? So the argument that they're making here is that Suburban Auto Group is unique because they provide the trunk monkey. And the trunk monkey performs a variety of functions. That's what they call it themselves.
Pending approval by Department of Agriculture.
There we go.
Here we are.
Also, more racy content, sorry.
My dad let us even touch his new car.
Yeah.
I think it came with the car. Hey. Wait!
The Trunk Monkey Chaperone version. An innovative idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
When I'm driving, I like to play it safe. That's why I never text and drive. With my Trunk Monkey, I can send hands-free texts. Send. I'm running late. I'll be there in 10 minutes.
Bananas, bananas, bananas.
The Trunk Monkey Texting Edition, only at Suburban Auto Group.
If you want hunky, get with the monkey. Oh, so now he's a monkey.
Cat is fabulous.
That phone. The funniest thing in this ad is this monkey's phone.
Get with the monkey. Oh, so now he's a monkey.
I've had that phone. Like that ancient flip phone.
Cat is fabulous.
Ma'am?
How about if we don't give us a ticket today and just a warning?
License and registration.
Okay.
This your monkey?
The Trunk Monkey, a revolutionary idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
On my way into work, I spilled hot coffee on my lap, and I lost control of my car.
Shock advised. Stand clear.
No. For the most part, I'm glad that I bought a car with the Trunk Monkey.
The Trunk Monkey, a life-saving idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
Yeah, happened about a month ago. I was driving my new truck home from the bingo and it just died. Now, next thing I know, I seen this bright light up in the sky. Then aliens was everywhere. Now, I don't do probes, so I'm glad I bought a truck with a trunk monkey.
The Trunk Monkey, an out-of-this-world idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group.
It goes on like this for another 10 minutes. Or like another 6 minutes. But yeah, overt, lots of appeals to violence, right? Appeals to force, the utility of the trunk monkey. It can defeat burglars, hide bodies, fight aliens. It may help you if you're injured. Right, none of these being selling the auto group on practical things like their lower prices compared to their their rivals, the breadth of their inventory, the quality of the products that they're selling, right? It's all focused on the humor inherent in the trunk monkey, which I thought was really funny. So I think this is another example of just a general like non sequitur fallacy, right? It's just the trunk monkey has nothing to do with the actual credentials or the actual like things that the auto group itself would sell. But there's definitely like within each of these, there's also the appeal to force, the bandwagon, and all different kinds. Deborah, I want to talk about yours also. This is Pond's extract. Also, Kat's comment on this, saying that it looked like it's from the colonial era, is really amusing to me. This is Pond's extract. The old family doctor, Pond's extract. For cuts, wounds, and bruises, Pond's extract has proved its value in thousands of cases. Every home should have a bottle of Pond's extract within instant reach to provide against the accidents so sure to occur in every family. The standard for 60 years. Refuse substitutes. Ordinary witch hazel has not the strength, purity, or healing properties which have made Pond's extract famous. Interesting booklet, first aid to the injured, free if you write. So that's fun, right? Who doesn't want extra literature? This is really funny. Just judging by this ad, like, what is Pond's extract?
I guessed it was a type of witch hazel, since it discussed that ordinary witch hazel doesn't have the strength, and witch hazel is like an extract of
not the strength or purity. A weird appeal to purity there too. Strange. Or healing properties that have made Pond's extract famous. Right? Calling stuff an extract. I mean, this is like the 1900s style rhetoric, but it's like calling something like ointment or salve. Like it means nothing. Like I don't know what it is. So what are you extracting? Like Pond is the name of the guy who owns the company. It's just, so this guy removed something from something else. Like that's really weird to me. So I thought this was really funny, and it really got me curious about, like, I don't really know what it is, right? Like I think you're right to the appeal to tradition here, the standard for 60 years, right? Just judging by this ad itself, we don't even really know what it is. It has some vague relationship to witch hazel, but we don't know what it's exactly even for. But whatever it is, it's been around for a long time, and that means it's good, right? So that's the essence of the appeal to tradition. And then, as you also point out, the old family doctor, right? Maybe even invoking like kind of a folksy appeal to authority, right? Like this is like it's like sort of an appeal to tradition, and also an appeal to like the idea of like, I don't know, herbalistic remedies or something like that as being superior. Like the old ways are better. These old medicines, like there's a lot of that in the even now in the modern sort of alternative medicine community. But so I got curious. I had to know what exactly Pond's extract was, and where is it at? No. Oh, that's right. I have the other URL saved here. I don't see my bookmarks. Our heritage. So Pond's is still around, and they're making skincare products, right? Again, here's some old timey. This is very modernist kind of like images, but there's a bottle of old Pond's extract. And I was like, oh, I wonder if you can see what's in Pond's extract. Ingredients: alcohol, witch hazel, and water. That's it. This is witch hazel. It's literally just witch hazel and alcohol. Or like rubbing alcohol and witch hazel, not like whiskey alcohol. I wouldn't drink the Pond's extract, but it's just witch hazel. It's like a topical, like not really a cream, but it's like something you would use for like, to clean dirt off your face, to like, clear your pores if you have a lot of acne or something like that. Use it for like the stuff that witch hazel is used for. So it's just witch hazel. And they've actually, apparently there was like, there was an issue with Congress back in the day where they had to remove this idea that it was medicine because they can't prove that it does anything. And actually there's some limited evidence to suggest that witch hazels can actually be skin abrasives, and they can actually irritate your skin. And a lot of them they're marketed as if they were eczema treatments. So yeah, it's kind of similar to hydrogen peroxide. I don't know like what the strict difference between like a witch hazel, rubbing alcohol, and hydrogen peroxide is, but all of those are generally used for similar stuff. Although I don't know if you could use witch hazel for like sterilization in the same way that you could use like isopropyl alcohol to sterilize something. That is a question for somebody with more expertise than me. But I know that like growing up, this is the kind of stuff like my mom would have had, and she would have been like, you know, this will cure everything from cancer to acne. So like, a very, very good example of the appeal to tradition. And another example of appeal to tradition is it's less a specific, but Critty has decided to talk about the idea that men propose to women as like a social convention is an appeal to tradition. I thought that was a really interesting way to approach this one, that, you know, there's no rule anywhere that says that men always have to propose to women, that women like although Critty, your response did sort of raise the suggestion that lots of people have been proposing to you. As you said that like I think you said something like every time, you said something about every time, and it made it sound like you've been through more than one proposal, which, you know, again, maybe you're something of the bandwagon appeal. But I think this is an interesting like take on that, is like a lot of our, you know, social conventions, maybe not a lot of our social conventions, but there are a lot of, you know, social constructs that aren't necessarily grounded in the rational, and they are grounded in just the, you know, this is the way that things have always been, right? Which on the face of it is just, you know, not the strongest justification. And I thought that was an interesting take on answering this. I have another one from Abigail B. This one is Target. And I like this one for a couple of reasons. Abigail, I think you're absolutely right to point out the bandwagon fallacy in this. For the A-list, look at all of these well-dressed children at such reasonable prices, right? Target's demographic is right there in the young new families that want to appear like they have more money than they shop at that they shop at Walmart, but don't shop at stores like, you know, they shop more at like Kohl's and Target, right? And I think the bandwagon appeal is absolutely correct here, right? You want to look good like all these other people. It's also kind of an appeal to snobbery, right? Don't you want to look good like these other children? Also, you know, mentioning this, the slogan for the A-list, I think there's a little bit of equivocation here, right? Like Abigail points out, like the suggestion seems to be that dressing like this will lead to better performance. And I think that that's absolutely right. And I think there's also an equivocation here on what does the A-list mean? That it's like, you know, A-list meaning not just academic performance, but A-list being, you know, it's kind of like a euphemism for like the group of popular people. The most popular people is the A-list, right? A-list celebrities and things like that, right? Join the A-list, right? It's sort of equivocating on like, well, what is school for, right? School seems to be for producing educated people, not like necessarily the most important thing you're doing there is debuting your social status through like the great things that you choose to wear. There's definitely an element of that to it, right? School does have a social purpose and a socializing purpose of getting people together and, you know, acclimated to being in a society, right? We live in a society, but, you know, not necessarily the most important thing. I thought that was a really good one because it's a lot of different things kind of really wrapped up into one. And, you know, some very stylish kids. This girl's glasses are really great. She looks like, you know, future librarians of America. Let's see. This one was an interesting one. And so this is where I want to come back to the idea of what jacked means. Because Kylie brings up this article from Men's Health or Men's Journal. Yes, you can go vegan and get jacked. Here's how. And I think I wanted to quote you, Kylie. The misdirection, I believe, is the use of the incorrect image of a, quote, jacked guy working out and only using a couple of professional athletes. And as she mentioned earlier in her response, like whenever she thinks of someone jacked, she thinks of like, you know, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? A larger than life individual, right? So there's kind of this maybe equivocation, I think, more so than Kylie points to the ad hominem, but I think what we're really getting at here and what she's pointing out in her description of the misdirection is this, we're equivocating on this idea of what it means to be jacked, right? If you look at this guy, you know, I mean, what do you think? Is this guy jacked? Maybe. Kind of depends, right? It's kind of a vague toned, in my opinion, right? Like, I would say he looks like he's in good shape, right? But, I wouldn't necessarily call him jacked. Like, when I think jacked, I do think someone like sort of larger than life. Herculean is jacked, right? Thor is jacked, right? Thor's ruined my perception of what jacked means. So if you don't look like somebody from a Marvel movie, you're not jacked, right? Even
something really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you seen the new Thor movie?
No. Is he jacked
Okay,
again?
then I won't spoil anything. But yeah, that's never mind.
Okay. Oh man. All right. I hope he's vegan. I hope that comes up. That'd be hilarious. That would be really on par. But it really kind of depends, right? Yeah. Like, I think that maybe a more modest, and as this article goes on, like, this isn't the only appeal that they rely on, but it is kind of an appeal to popularity. Like, oh, you could be jacked like everybody else, even if you're vegan. It's like, oh, don't worry about the weird stigma of veganism. Like, you can still be mistaken for a jacked beef eater, and like still have a more vegan-based diet. And, I think this is also maybe kind of cherry picking, especially this opening salvo here. There's this nasty rumor that's been going around for years. Maybe you've heard it, or maybe you've even spouted it yourself. There's no way a guy's going to get enough protein from a vegan diet to build the kind of ultra ripped body you're aiming for. Again, ultra ripped, he's in very good shape, but I wouldn't necessarily call him ultra ripped. Okay. Tell that to NFL pro Griff Whalen. Who is Griff Whalen? Does anybody have a point of reference for Griff Whalen? Not a clue. I only knew who Griff Whalen was because I used to play Madden NFL, and he was a less than average slot receiver for the Colts. He is indeed a vegan. This is Griff Whalen. He is no longer plays football. He was not particularly great. He caught 50 passes in 5 years. Fantastic. Probably like a good enough athlete to get to the highest level of his sport, no doubt. But he's also like he's a pretty tiny guy for an NFL wide receiver. He was 5'9", less than 200 pounds. Like, I'm bigger than that. And I'm clearly not jacked. I'm not even in very great shape. I have the body of an academic. So I don't know. Like, again, the appeal here is like too hyperbolic, right? And it's a little catchy, it's a little clickbaity, like, oh, get jacked with veganism. It's really more, I don't think people are getting into veganism to get jacked. They're getting into veganism because of like ideological and health reasons. Like, and also these players that they're pointing to, these professional athletes, they pay like professional nutritionists and dietitians to sculpt individually cultivated diets. They pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in order to maintain their physical abilities. Like, it's kind of a false promise to say that like you could be just like these people if you're like, even if you're vegan. Like, no, you could probably be like in pretty okay shape, but like, I don't know, it's like kind of ridiculous. So I like that one. I like that one because I think it's a couple of different things kind of rolled up. And then we have another one here. This is Katie bringing back the humor. This is for salmon.
At the river mouth, the bears catch only the tastiest, most tender salmon. Which is exactly what we at John West want.
When the bear kicks him. That's so funny. It's such a well-delivered kick.
John West endured the worst to bring you the best.
So Katie points out the straw man. I think that, the reason I wanted to point this one out too is I think this is definitely non sequitur, right? Because on the one hand, like this is not what people. I want to kind of call attention to their tagline that they just said, right? Which is, I don't have the closed captioning on. Maybe I can. It's unavailable. What does it say?
To bring you the best.
Right before that. Let's go back a little bit.
To bring you the best.
Okay, that's exactly what he just said.
John West endured the worst to bring you the best.
So John West endured the worst to bring you the best, right? And when you think of like, oh, fishermen enduring the worst, what do you think about?
More just the elements: rain, sun,
Yeah,
salt water.
Right, like you know, salmon. Obviously, salmon is, you know, there's Atlantic salmon, sure. There's a lot of like river salmon too. You know, so the idea that what that really means is that they are fist fighting the bears for individual salmon. Then what I feel like we have here is like an equivocation again on the idea of like, what does it mean to be the worst, right? So it's like this non sequitur and maybe equivocation. Like a straw man would really be more like, you know, a straw man is, there's really like sort of demands that there's at least two people in dialogue, where one person is misrepresenting or distorting what someone else has presented so that they can knock that down. So, and when we get to, I think we have a good example of that in Tucker's argument. I think there's some definite straw manning going on there, but I think that Klaus pretty eloquently demonstrates like the relationship between like an equivocation and straw man with this ye old billboard, which says GOP, and it has what is clearly the symbol of communist Soviet Russia as the O. There's something here. I think this is just like who funded and paid for this. Not very well. I mean, lately, it's usually a criticism of the left that everyone is a stinking communist. You don't, up until recently, we haven't seen too many people throwing to the right. Now the right are a bunch of stinking communists. Poor whatever actual communists are, lost in the shuffle of all this. Nobody even knows what communism even is. But I think this is a good example of the straw man, right? You have to really consider the context of what this would have been in, right? And this in particular, I can't remember exactly if Klaus, if you can remind me maybe what year this was specifically, but I remember a lot of this going around right after 2016 during the Mueller investigation. There was all of the accusations of there was Russian interference in the election via spreading propaganda and misinformation through social media channels like Facebook and things like that, which that is a totally different and real concern to be worried about, that you can divorce completely from just calling the opposition communists. You know, modern day Russia is not it seems like every year was an age for a long time there. You know, it's one thing, you know, you can be concerned about foreign influence via social media channels and what exactly the consequences of that influence were, without defeating the easy straw man that, oh, well, the GOP is just a bunch of communists. Well, no, that's like clearly a weird distortion. And it also really muddies the water on, you know, one of the things that I don't want to get too far out of my own lane and like become a political scientist, but one of the things that I always found really frustrating with a lot of that rhetoric around Donald Trump and around like the way that his campaign was approached by various Russian assets was that, you know, there was this misattribution that, you know, Donald Trump was somehow had to be a willing agent of the Russian government, when, you know, it's pretty par for the course that foreign governments try to influence politics in other countries. Like that's something we do all the time. It's like the history of the CIA is the history of that. Like, so it's not surprising that some people made some passes at a campaign that was, for all intents and purposes, like pretty fresh to the political scene. You know, that's a far cry from calling Donald Trump himself an agent of the Russian government, which I think is an oversimplification and again muddies the waters. And speaking of muddying the waters, let's talk about Ted Cruz for just a second. Yeah, they're getting these fallacies are getting progressively risky and political. But this is Rebecca, the false cause. Senator Ted Cruz says pretty recently, as recently as last month, the impact of President Biden being beholden to the Green New Deal radicals in his party has electricity costs through the roof in Texas. And as Rebecca rightly points out, the Green New Deal did not pass, and it's a much more complicated situation that describes why exactly gas prices are the way they are now, such as the war in Ukraine, interruptions in worldwide supply chains. Some of this stuff started before Biden was even in office. It's pretty common for the next administration to blame all of the current social problems on the previous administration and, ad infinitum. A lot of these things are, some of them are directly related to political forces. Sometimes there's a lot of other things going on. But also, Cruz using the passive voice, he is being beholden. So it's the impact of Biden is being beholden to, like, it's an elegant phrase. I would rather a clear attribution of cause and effect there. Ted Cruz went to Harvard. He was a very good debater. He knows exactly what he's doing. If you think that Ted Cruz doesn't realize when he's making fallacious appeals or, doesn't understand when he's being vague, Ted Cruz is an intelligent person. He's not for nothing. He's very good at, like, fighting with people with words, right? That's like, if you're very good at debate, that's what you're very good at doing. You can take control of the conversation and talk about the things that you want to talk about. But I think this is a very clear example of the false cause there. These things aren't related, and this thing isn't even real. It's just a theoretical thing that people in a party talk about. If there are elements of President Biden's choices that have led to higher gas prices, Ted, talk about those specifics, and then, maybe we can have a conversation. But just alluding vaguely to this passive Green Deal, like that's not helping anything. And then let's see, we got Misty, we've got the bandwagon appeal. Wouldn't be a fallacy day without at least one good bandwagon.
We're America's favorite, #1.
Where else could you have so much fun?
There's just one place you can go where it's fun to eat and talk and laugh and still get some change back. We're sparkling at McDonald's, taking pride in what we do. That's why 11 million times a day we get to say thank you. Fast, fresh, always fun.
Thanks for making us #1.
We did it together.
I would argue that we are too cynical of a society to pass that kind of commercial anymore. I would think that the idea that McDonald's is the most fun that you're going to have on any given day. I would ask, have you been to a McDonald's? I don't think that I've ever seen. Maybe clearly, maybe some people are having a great time there, right? This is in particular. Like, the people canning through the lobby. We got the workers are so happy to be cleaning the windows, right? For the kids, maybe, right? Kids running around oblivious to things, like running through the play place. Like, you try to go to a play place as an adult, and all of a sudden the police are getting called, and like, I just want to play in the ball pit, but that I can't do that anymore. So all of a sudden, my good times ruined at McDonald's. But I think this is it's clearly an exaggeration, right? This is like, look how much fun you could be having at McDonald's, right? Again, somewhat like really great deep cuts. And again, maybe too much. This kind of commercial would never get aired nowadays. Like, we're too sarcastic. We're too just cynical, just too much. It's too much exuberance and effluence, effusiveness for one fast food commercial. Kat, we have a hasty generalization to talk about. This one was, again, another oldie. This one was troubled me, and this woman is clearly not an actor.
A life insurance policy has always been very important to me. But as I grew older...
Listen to this music. What feeling does this music evoke in you? Right, it's like... it's like giving me like a weird feeling in my chest where I'm like, I'm feeling like the pull of like misery and pity, like just from the musical cues alone. Like, oh, poor Flo. Like, you're living in a house taken over by plants. Your life insurance is too expensive.
The premiums became larger than my income. I couldn't let the policy lapse. It just didn't seem fair.
She said like an actual real person with the that was, I don't know, that seemed like especially I like a house with plants too. It does look like she's living on AstroTurf though. I don't know if green carpet was a good choice for Flo.
That's when my son told me about Ideal Life Insurance Redemption.
Call or log on today and find out how Ideal can help.
Thank you, Ideal.
The music is doing so much work for the appeal to pity here. Again, there's not a single piece of information in this commercial about the actual policy itself, what it entails, or anything like that. It's just we have the name itself, Ideal, which is not exactly fallacious, but like just saying the name, like I got Ideal Insurance, like is kind of like you can't even say the name without feeling like an equivocation, right? We don't know anything about this insurance company or like how much she was paying, like any of the practical concerns, right? And again, Kat says this is at least an example of the hasty generalization, the bandwagon, and the false dilemma. The false dilemma, we're either going to have this insurance or we're going to be paying too much. Everyone can save money in the same way that she has. I think this is a really good, another example of like sort of how their multiple fallacies kind of build on each other. And we got one more in here before we take a break. This is Patrick, the appeal to authority. Oprah likes bread.
This is the joy for me. I love bread. I love bread. I now just manage it, so I don't deny myself bread. I have bread every day. I have bread every day. That's the genius of this program. I lost 26 pounds and I have eaten bread every single day.
Okay, Oprah likes bread. I've lost 26 pounds and I eat all the bread that I want. Okay, the appeal to authority, right? Oprah is not necessarily a diet authority that I would rely on, but also, there's also the, false cause fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? Well, just because you have eaten bread every day and just because you happen to have lost weight doesn't mean that Weight Watchers is the link that is allowing you to eat all this bread and lose all this weight at the same time. Also, how long were you on this diet that you lost 26 pounds? Like, it's like the last time I looked into it, it's healthy to lose like a pound a week by adjusting your diet to just counting calories. If you even live just like a moderately sedentary lifestyle. So what, were you on this diet for 26 weeks? And all you eat was bread? Because I don't know, that bread has a lot of carbs and calories. I don't know. It seems unlikely that bread should be the most important factor in choosing a weight loss plan, right? Maybe you also like bread, but it just doesn't see it. The relationship between those things seems incredibly unclear. On that note, we've reached 52. So let's go ahead. We'll take 10 here, and then we'll come back at, let's call it 7:02, and we'll jump into the New York Times and Jeffrey A. Tucker's Hey New York Times, this is why Uber is awesome. Okay, welcome back. All right, so now that we have our radars finally attuned, let's take a look at some arguments. The first one I wanted to talk about was the New York Times editorial board, mostly because Tucker's argument is a direct response to this, right? This is one of the few examples where we've had a couple examples where somebody is talking exactly about the other argument, right? We looked at that with the Tremitiere argument about election day. We looked at that with the Walsh argument about Bernie Sanders' argument about free college. So we've looked at some answers, but these in particular, you can see on the screen here, this was published on April 10, 2017. April 11, 2017. This is the next day. This was like a response to it. So this is like a really immediate response. So, so this is the New York Times is the editorial board of the New York Times. It's in their opinion section. So this is distinct from their news section. So what do they say? The gig economy's false promise, right? The promises Silicon Valley makes about the gig economy can sound appealing. Its digital technology lets workers become entrepreneurs, we are told, freed from the drudgery of 9-to-5 jobs. Students, parents, and others can make extra cash in their free time while pursuing their passions, maybe starting a thriving small business. Open question, what kind of appeal are we seeing here at the beginning of this? Is this an appeal to an emotion? Is this logic? Is this establishing credibility?
Is it an appeal to pity, like to pity the people who are just trying to make extra cash?
Well, I think maybe we can put a pin in maybe whether or not it's an appeal to pity, but I think it is what you're detecting here is the fact that emotions are being appealed to, that we're being told a story, right? They start off with the story of, this is the story that Silicon Valley tells you, right? What's Silicon Valley? Nothing?
Isn't that like where it's like familiar, but just not enough to where it makes it weird or something?
Oh, no, that's Uncanny Valley. That's a totally different valley. That's a good valley, though. No, Silicon Valley is, it's outside of San Francisco, in San Jose. It's where all the tech companies are, right? Silicon Valley, it's a piece of rhetorical device that they're using here. Is what we call a metonymy. It's when an attribute of something is used as if it were that thing itself. It stands in for that thing. It's like when we refer to like the White House said, right? The White House itself didn't speak, obviously, right? The press secretary spoke as the mouthpiece for the government, right? Whenever you hear about Silicon Valley, it's sort of wrapping all of these different tech institutions up. It's when people like sort of talk about Hollywood says or stuff like that, right? It's a way, I think, it's a way of stereotyping and maybe overgeneralizing and simplifying a lot of things into an easily digestible idea. And generally, I think, depending on who you are, sometimes Silicon Valley can have positive connotations, sometimes it can have negative connotations. I think here they're trying to invoke its negative connotations, right? Because again, this is the false promise of the gig economy, and where are those false promises coming from? They're coming from Silicon Valley, right? So it's sort of implicating all of these like different kinds of companies that would exist in Silicon Valley. And it's using Silicon Valley as like, this is standing in for everything, right? The gig economy can sound appealing. It's digital technology lets workers become entrepreneurs. We are told. We've got some passive here. Who's telling us? Well, different entities that they're wrapping up as Silicon Valley. Freed from drudgery. What kind of jobs what kind of 9-to-5 jobs are these if they're drudgery? What does drudgery mean?
Retail.
Okay, that's a good definition by example, but like what about the word drudgery? What does it mean if something is drudgery work?
Unpleasant,
Yeah, generally unpleasant, right? We can go to ye old Merriam-Webster: dull, irksome, and fatiguing work, uninspiring or menial labor, right? Drudgery of this. Even the example sentence is about the kind of job that you're going to have, right? So, right, the promise that Silicon Valley is selling us, according to this story that the Times is starting off with, is that we're being free, right? That these different companies are bringing us more freedom, right? Which, sounds like a great promise, right? It's something that directly Tucker is going to begin with the same idea. We are only a few years into the emergence of a new form of market freedom, right? Both of these are talking about selling you the idea of freedom. Tucker is on the side that they are indeed selling you freedom, and it is real. New York Times editorial board is saying this is the false story. This is the myth that you're being sold about freedom. So in reality, there is no utopia at companies like Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and Handy, right? So here's some specific examples of what the New York Times means by Silicon Valley, right? A little bit more specific, that's good, right? We're not talking about Apple, we're not talking about Microsoft, we're talking about these specific gig economy type companies. And this is 2017, right? There's more than that now. But Uber and Lyft, obviously the big ones that probably most people have heard of, whose workers are often manipulated into working long hours for low wages while continuously chasing the next ride or task. These companies have discovered they can harness advances in software and behavioral sciences to old-fashioned worker exploitation, according to a growing body of evidence, because employees lack the basic protections of American law. So this is the reality, according to the New York Times, right? Here's the myth, here's the reality, right? And this paragraph itself is going to be quoted twice by Tucker, right? He's going to attempt to counter a couple of ideas. The main ideas in this paragraph are that these companies are manipulating and exploiting, right? And why are they manipulating and exploiting? Because their employees lack basic protections, right? You're being sold a false promise, so there's this expectation that it's going to liberate you and give you freedom. However, you're actually being manipulated and exploited into working more for less. Tucker argues that this is not the case. Before we go on, and this is a point that Tucker brings up too, what is a utopia? A perfect world, right? And it can get a little bit more complicated than that, but utopia literally means no place. It's an ideal world that doesn't exist, right? Strictly, it's a pun on the word utopia with a E, which in Greek means good place, but there is no good place because, it gets complicated. It all goes back to Thomas More. But generally, we understand in the popular imagination, the idea of a utopia is a non-existent ideal place, right? Which is distinct from a dystopia, which is a nightmare, horrible reality, right? 1984, Brave New World, The Hunger Games, right? These are dystopias. I can't really point to a utopia clearly that everyone would understand. There's Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is a matriarchal society that existed high in the Indian jungle. That's from like 1900. That's an older one. There's a lot of like pre-industrial utopias. There's not a lot of post-industrial utopias. Maybe that's just something about that kind of culture that we live in. But anyway, so this is they're selling us the idea of utopia. Is kind of what the Times is saying. They're selling us on this fantasy place where everyone is free and everyone's their own boss. But in reality, you're just working more and you're getting paid less, and you're losing some basic protections. A recent story in the Times by Noam Schreiber vividly described how Uber and other companies use tactics developed by the video game industry to keep drivers on the road when they would prefer to call it a day, raising company revenue while lowering drivers' per hour earnings. One Florida driver told the Times he earned less than $20,000 a year before expenses like gas and maintenance. In New York City, an Uber drivers group affiliated with the Machinists Union said that more than 1/5 of its members earned less than $30,000 before expenses. This is the first time we're sort of pivoting to any kind of hard evidence, right? We have it sort of alluded to here according to a growing body of evidence, but they're turning to some reporting by their own reporter, clearly, but some anecdotal witness testimony here, eyewitness testimony, some individuals. Maybe this is anecdotal, maybe this is indicative, right? We don't quite know yet, but we are getting a little bit more of a logos-like appeal here. We're getting some more, some actual numbers and some evidence. Big if true, right? Table it for now. Gig economy workers tend to be poorer and are more likely to be minorities than the population at large. A survey by the Pew Research Center found last year, right? Again, now we've got another appeal to logos here. And, establishing maybe, up till now, right? The ethos of the New York Times editorial board is probably really strongly tied to whether or not you buy this story that they've told you about the false promise versus the reality, right? If you find that the reality doesn't really comport with your experience in the world, they're probably losing you on the ethos scale, right? They're probably not really establishing themselves as a source of like credible trustworthiness, right? Because they're not describing the world that comports to your experience. But if you do buy this distinction and you do think that, this does more clearly and truthfully describe the situation than this false promise lays out, then maybe this pathos has moved you to accept their ethos, right? It's like sort of, again, how like those two things sort of work hand in hand. And you're already primed now that they've sort of, appeal to, what emotions, if you're being manipulated and exploited, how does that make you feel to be manipulated and exploited? Bad, right? You don't want to be manipulated and exploited. It's unfair, right? The idea of unfairness is baked into the definition of manipulation and exploitation itself, right? We look up, to treat or operate with as if by the hands of mechanical means, right? But to change by artful or unfair means, so as to serve one's purpose, right? To fix, to doctor, to exploit. An act or insistence of exploiting, especially a notable, memorable, or that's an exploit. To exploit is to make use of, to utilize, to make use of meanly or unfairly for one's own advantage, right? To exploit, rather than heroic exploits, right? Language is hard. Words often mean contradictory things in different contexts. But right, if you read this story and you feel like, oh, this is an unfair thing that's happening, that's the idea that the New York Times is trying to establish their ethos by appealing to your sense of civic fairness, right? And saying that these are companies that are unfairly taking advantage of like loopholes in the law, or they're not establishing that because by this time, the way that they've told you the story, you're like, this isn't really manipulation and exploitation, which is where Tucker is, right? He doesn't find that this is manipulation or exploitation. He thinks that, these people are entering freely into relations with these companies. So if you're choosing to enter into this freely, you're not being exploited. More on that soon. So compared with the popular, so we're getting some numbers that are giving us like a little bit more of a reasonable or possibly plausible boundaries in this reality that the Times is trying to describe here, where most people who are gig workers are minorities, that they're almost twice as many earn under $30,000, 40% are Black or Hispanic compared with 27% of all Americans. So there's a very particular type of person that the gig economy is more likely to be appealed to, or more likely to appeal to. And importantly, most said that money they earned from online platforms was essential or important, right? Put a pin in that too, because that's not quite exactly the picture that Tucker is painting of this, right? From this, the way that the Times is laying this out, right, we're getting the sense that Silicon Valley, these companies like Uber and Lyft, are promising that you will have the freedom to liberate yourself from traditional jobs and be able to work for yourself and earn money as an independent business, right? But that's not the case because most of these people are actually low income low-income earners, and they're spending more time working for less actual income than they would, and less protections, right? And that's sort of the constant theme that the Times is coming back to, is this idea of the classification of these people as workers is what is leading directly to the exploitation and manipulation. That's going to be an important point, which is the next idea right here. Since workers for most gig economy companies are considered independent contractors, not employees, they do not qualify for basic protections like overtime pay and minimum wages. This helped Uber, which started in 2009, quickly grow to 700,000 active drivers in the United States, nearly 3 times the number of taxi drivers and chauffeurs in the country in 2014. And you got to think, this is 2017, right? This is pre-pandemic times. How many people added to the amount of people working for gig-like businesses? I would imagine, and this is an interesting question for y'all, how many of y'all actually have any hands-on experience? Anybody driving for Uber Eats, DoorDash? Katie? How do you, so anybody who has some direct experience, I would be interested to hear so far your take on this.
Not currently am I driving. I used to drive for Favor and a little bit of Grubhub, I think.
Okay.
DoorDash.
Grubhub, no relation to actual Katie Grubbs.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mainly drove for Favor, and it was a lot of work, like excessive amount of work compared to the other compared to DoorDash, because Favor, it's like you have to illegally call up the place, like be on your phone, because you have to order it for the person.
Oh.
Yeah. And so it's like I would call while I'm driving, while I'm like doing maps, like going where I'm going.
Right.
While I'm on the phone saying, hey, like I need to order this, this, and this. And then this was in 2019, I think.
Okay.
So I think it was right when the pandemic started, or about then. So but the gas prices weren't like now. Apparently they raised because it was like $2 and something cents per delivery,
right,
on top of tips. So I would go to the most like richest area to get the best tips. So I go to like these $1 million house stuff, which was a smart move, because other people, they would give really bad tips. But so yeah, there's no sort of any benefits or anything like that. There's I think they may have reimbursed like gas maybe a little bit, but yeah, overall it's a tough job, because you have to just park somewhere you have to wait for someone to put in an order. And it's a lot of driving. Like it would be like 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. You got to wait for the order if it's not even ready.
Right.
One time I waited for an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours for one order.
Wow.
And so so you can't just go back home because you're far away and you're trying to get somewhere. And I was doing this in San Antonio.
Oh, that's huge too. Yeah.
Yeah, and Austin is much, much more. I feel like San Antonio is more like it's a smaller city. Like places are not as far compared to Austin. Because I'm in Austin now, so it's like that would be way more. It would be like really hard to do it in Austin.
When it also, there's like some geographical barriers in Austin that make it hard, like going across the river at parts of the day is just impossible, that like you wouldn't necessarily run into with a place like San Antonio or even like Houston, like the bigger, more like suburban kind of cities. So it kind of sounds like your experience is maybe a little bit more comporting with this idea that like it's not quite what it seems to be. It's not quite what it's sold to be. Maybe maybe your experience isn't even exactly what they're talking about, but like it is interesting to hear from people that like it's a lot harder work than people might at first seem. I know whenever I worked at restaurants, we kind of arbitrarily hated the gig economy, the gig pickup stuff, because like we would put it out and sometimes people wouldn't show up for 30-40 minutes. Maybe we're in the middle of like making a dinner rush of customers that are actually in, and it's like now in the middle of this I get a $50 favor order that I have to like I've got tables that I have to like make food for. Now I have to stop doing that and have to make this favor order, who I'm not going to see any money off of that. Although there was at one point where we did start getting some tips off of, we started getting tips off of like call-in orders. But even ours were like set up a little bit differently. Then like sometimes like favor will come through Starbucks now, and they don't know how to they don't know how to order stuff, and like we'll be out of stuff, and I'll try to talk to them. And they're like, I don't know, and so like then the order's wrong. Maybe that's going to affect their tips. There was a pretty large scale study done a couple of years ago about Uber tipping, and which revealed that there is a low correlation between the quality of service and the amount of money you get tipped, which is a terrifying prospect for people that work for tips, because generally the ideology is the better service you provide, the more money you make. But as a matter of fact, it is your beliefs about tipping that drive how much you tip, independent of like what kind of service you receive.
One thing I want to add is with favor compared to other companies is like DoorDash, they would show what you're getting tipped before you even accept. But with favor, you don't know until you finish the job, but they don't know what they're getting. Like they don't know if you've gotten their order wrong. And then it cuts off all communication after that. So if you forgot like a sauce or something like major, like you messed up their order, it's just like it won't allow you to text them after that, because it usually gives you their number, and it says you can't text them no more, where it like makes it locked.
That's brutal.
Like you don't know tips until after with favor compared to other companies.
And another thing that it's kind of seeming like as we're talking about this is maybe it's unfair to compare all of these in this kind of non-nuanced kind of way. Maybe there's some benefits to some companies relative to others. Maybe there's like smaller companies that do some of this stuff better than the bigger companies. So maybe we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe we don't overly reduce. Maybe this is kind of a straw man. Right? Maybe this is like reducing all of these things to just like, oh, all of these are just the same. Maybe they're not the same, right? Maybe there are some that are a little bit better than others. The point that I wanted to get at here, and maybe you could actually illuminate a little bit on this, is this distinction between independent contractors and employees. There's at least two major reasons why I wanted to talk about this distinction. I think this is the most important point in this article. The use of independent contractors is hardly an innovation. Traditional businesses like garment factories, construction companies, and trucking have often misclassified employees as contractors to avoid offering benefits, paying payroll taxes, and abiding by labor laws. What makes this different is that gig economy businesses are arguing that their use of independent contractor model is in fact better for workers. And that's really what this argument turns on. Is this classification reasonable or not, right? Is this better or worse, right? Because if you're an independent contractor, right, if you're an employee, then you have access to things like minimum wage laws and stuff, and they can't pay unless you're the only exemption. There's some exemptions to minimum wage laws, like for instance, for whatever reason, waiters can get paid less than minimum wage as a base salary, but even tips have to make up. If your tips don't make up to, don't like offset your pay up to minimum wage, then your employer must fill in that gap, right? It just so happens that like if you're a waiter and your tips aren't making up for minimum wage, maybe you should not be a waiter. But I don't think I've ever seen that situation really happening. Maybe it does, but it's also, it's kind of taboo to talk about your money. So maybe it's happening and people are talking about it. It's unclear, but the idea that you're going to get access to a minimum wage at all is really tied to whether or not you're classified as an independent contractor or not. If you're an independent contractor, you've negotiated by signing up for DoorDash, you've tacitly agreed to the independent contractor rate of what is it, like $2.13 per order or something like that, if even that. So that's unfortunately for the New York Times, nobody has been by this article in a while because this link is dead. It goes to a 404 error. Seems a pretty important oversight on the New York Times' part. There is a way to find that page. I did have to dig a little bit for it. I shouldn't have had to dig for it. But it's a page that goes on about misclassification of employees as independent contractors, right? And it goes into a lot more detail about myths of misclassification and a lot more resources there. That would have been a useful link if it would have actually worked. But this question of whether or not these people who are working for these apps are we misclassifying them as independent contractors when they really should be employees, right? Because it would stand to reason if you don't have to pay a minimum amount to your employees, what does that mean for the cost of labor for a business?
Can you say that again?
If you are allowed to pay less than minimum wage, what does the price of labor, what happens to the price of labor from the business point of view?
Oh, you don't have to pay it.
You don't have to pay as much, right? Your overhead automatically goes down, right? Now, instead of, if you have 10 employees and you have to pay them $13 an hour, well, versus I have 10 independent contractors that I only have to pay $2 an hour, that's a fraction of the cost, right? All of a sudden it becomes cheaper to run my business, right? Keep a pin in that, because this is something that I don't think he addresses very well at all. And I think that's probably, I think it's the most important question. And it's, I think, the worst part of his argument, that he's got some things. I'll get to him. So increasingly, workers and government agencies are pushing back, right? Seattle passed an ordinance allowing Uber and Lyft drivers and other ride-hailing apps to unionize, right? That's another big thing. If you're an independent contractor, it somehow affects your ability to unionize. I don't exactly know. I don't think they explained it very well here. Maybe it's explained in this link, which doesn't work. That's a knock on them. A federal judge temporarily blocked a law on Tuesday after the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and some conservative groups filed lawsuits against the city. Workers have also sued various gig economy companies to seek overtime pay, reimbursement for expensive and other damages. Lyft recently agreed to a $27 million to pay $27 million to settle a class action lawsuit brought by drivers in California, right? Which again, big and true. Legislation and lawsuits might ensure that traditional labor laws are applied to the gig economy, but few smaller companies like Hello Alfred, which dispatches people to do household chores, and Managed by Q, the terribly named Managed by Q, totally did not see QAnon coming there, which provides office maintenance and cleaning services, are taking steps on their own by treating workers as employees, right? So it's this really important distinction of whether or not it's valid to classify these people as independent contractors or not. In addition to getting access to these employee protections, it also has like certain tax implications, right? I'm an independent contractor for my tutor.com work. I get paid more money up front because they don't take taxes out. I'm going to have to pay those taxes at the end of the year, regardless of whether or not I've budgeted out those taxes or not. And, I'm not really sure if a lot of people really understand that, but, there is a lot of literature that you click through at the beginning that maybe you don't read closely enough. Does that rise to the level of exploitation and manipulation? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see what Mr. Jeffrey the Bowtie Tucker has to say. So put a pin in these, right? We have some important ideas floating around here. This idea of misclassification, this distinction between independent contractors and employees, this idea that there's a false promise of freedom being offered. There's this idea of manipulation and exploitation. And so Tucker starts off with a different story, but also, interestingly enough, starts off with storytelling. In our highly regulated, static, and bureaucratized job marketplace, hobbled by a thicket of government rules and impositions, there appeared a beautiful thing, This is automatic. This is like King Arthur. Sometimes called the gig economy, it specializes in using mobile apps and other software to directly connect producers and consumers. These new strategies have turned billions of previously idle physical and human resources into ones active in markets, to the great satisfaction of people, but much to the annoyance of governments and their connected labor unions. There's a lot going on in this paragraph. First of all, what image of governments and labor unions do you get out of this picture of this story that he's telling you? This is very purple in terms of his prose, yes. Let's look at some specific things, right? Regulated and static. What does it mean for something to be highly regulated?
Monitored, lots of rules, lots of red tape.
A lot of rules, a lot of surveillance, maybe, right? A lot of rules, right? Lots of regulations, a lot of people checking up on stuff, right? Static. What is something? If something's static, what does it mean for something to be static, as opposed to dynamic?
Unchanging.
Exactly. It's unchanging. It's we could look it up in particular and get a more specific view. Well, that's not the right definition of static. Of, relating to, or producing stationary. No, that's electrostatic. Standing in one place, fixed, stationary. Characterized by a lack of movement, showing little change and little animation or progression. Producing an effect of repose or quiescence. It's the idea that it's not moving. It's stale, you could even say. What is something bureaucratized? What is a bureaucracy? This is one of those instances where a word, like, it literally means like marked and characterized by lots of bureaus. There's lots of little silos that are being created, right? If something's highly bureaucratized, that means that there are specific agencies that are dedicated. There's a specialization of labor that's being divided up in like, government is by sort of necessity a bureaucracy, right? Like corporations have bureaucracies. This college has bureaucracies. We have an advising department, which only specializes in advising. We have like the teaching people who specialize in teaching. We have, right? That's a bureaucracy is just an arrangement where there's a lot of these little specializations, right? Of, relating to, or having the characteristics of a bureaucracy. A body of an administrative policy making group, government characterized by specialization of functions, adherence to fixed rules, hierarchy of authority, centralization. It's also a feature of bureaucracy. A system of administration marked by officialism, red tape, and proliferation, right? So these are all negative things, right? This is what our job market has become: regulated. It's unchanging. It's static. It's marked by like highly specialized in a negative way that's not allowing lots of flexibility between ideas and positions. It's hobbled. What does it mean to be hobbled? That's horse talk. If one is hobbled, one is unable to move.
It has something to do with like the hoof, like keeping the feet together.
To make lame or limp, to hobble, right? We have the verb to hobble, which means literally to, for lack of a better word, to cripple, to hamper, to impede, to fetter, to obstruct, to what's the word I'm looking for? To oppress, if I'm being like super liberal with my language. Hobbled, right? The job by a thicket of government rules and imposition. What's a thicket? Going back to plants.
It's a grass you can't walk through.
Right? A thicket is like a thick it's like a thick forest that you can't easily get through, right? A dense growth of shrubbery or small trees, something resembling a thicket, something dense and impenetrable, a tangle. It's all jumbled up, right? So he's painting this picture of words about the marketplace, right? This is the story that we're being told here. What's the marketplace in America right now? It's overly regulated. It's bureaucratic. It's handicapped by this morass of rules and regulations, right? Rules and impositions. And in this state of oppression, there appeared a beautiful thing, right? This is like the language of myth, right? This is like a very highly like emotional story that he is telling us about markets. Never have like markets been described in such maybe never since like Edmund Burke have markets been described in such like florid language. Sometimes called the gig economy. I think this is a good description of the gig economy for sure. But after one good sentence, these new strategies have turned billions of previously idle physical and human resources. What are physical and human resources?
I was confused by this. I don't know what he means by that.
I think it just means people, right? I think human resources is just a euphemism for people, right? We're previously idle, right? There are billions of idle people just waiting for jobs, and they can't get these jobs because the jobs are hobbled by a thicket of government rules and impositions, right? They want to work, but they can't. And the more that they want to work, the great this beautiful thing has appeared that to help these people who want to work but just can't make their way through this horrible job marketplace. And what is this beautiful thing? It's annoying governments and their connected labor unions. That's interesting, right? Governments are annoyed by this freedom. Governments don't want you free. Governments want you hobbled by a thicket of rules and impositions. And they're connected labor unions, right? Labor unions is just an adjunct of governments, right? And we'll get back to the language that he uses there, right? We're being told a story about how government is oppressive, and it has created an unreasonable job market where people who want to work can't get work, right? And by the end of this paragraph, I would say that he has probably either established for you, either you are on board with this or you are not, or you maybe don't know what all these words mean. But once you look up the definitions of these words, I think he's painting a very clear picture of government and all the things that government does bad and negative. The market and all the things that the market does is beautiful and free and opposed to government, right? It's a very clear distinction he's drawing. So if that it's a very libertarian kind of position, you could say. The headline company here is Uber, a global ride-sharing service that only employs 7,000 people, but gives power to millions of drivers and passengers. There are also thousands of others. What a bright spot. Economic opportunities are being made available for millions, and these markets really do represent a hope for the future. That's interesting. Uber apparently only employs 7,000 people, but according to the New York Times, they have over 700,000 active drivers. That's orders of magnitude more people are working for Uber that are not necessarily employees of Uber, right? That means the cost of doing business for Uber, if they're only paying for 7,000 people, but they're getting access to a workforce of over 700,000, this pre-pandemic, that means that the cost of doing business for Uber is significantly lower than, Walmart, say, that has to pay a labor force. Walmart might have the most. Walmart and Amazon, I'm not sure which one has the bigger workforce, but Walmart pays like millions of people, right? Yeah. Walmart is often the single most robust employer in many states, right? And it's the cost of doing business for Walmart is huge. They have a huge overhead of doing this. Their profits are gigantic too, but a lot of that is going to go back into paying their own labor, right? Uber doesn't have that problem. They are worth a lot of money and they don't have to pay nearly as much as, say, a taxi company. you arguably might get a better experience with Uber than a taxi company too. And that's a legitimate thing also. The quality of the product might be better, right? And that is an argument in favor of a free market solution, and I will grant him that. That's not exactly where he goes, but I will give him that. The irony here is that these strategies are devolving capital control back to workers, just as the socialist wants to imagine it would be, or it should be, but it is happening through capitalistic process. You might think that the emergence of such markets would be created with universal acclaim, but of course nothing this dramatic is created with ubiquitous cheers. So, this is exactly what's at stake here. Are these things devolving capital control back to workers, right? Put a pin in how he uses workers here. What's a worker?
Someone who does the work.
Someone who does work, right? If I wanted to make a more robust economic distinction out of this, it would be an individual who sells their labor on a market. That is a worker, an individual worker. That's the common dictionary definition of a worker, I would say. Look it up. One that works especially at manual or industrial labor with particular material, a member of the working class. Oh, it's also got any of the sexually underdeveloped and usually sterile members of the colony of social ants. Not those kinds of workers, right? Unless they're actually banding together in some sort of Uber-like thing, where like I'm taking Anter or something. Anyway, that's the common definition of worker. And we see New York Times is using the idea, since workers for most gig economy companies are considered independent contractors, increasingly workers and government agencies are pushing back. Put a pin in how exactly the word workers is being used and understood here. New York Times has issued a major blast against the gig economy, and it has all the features of this genre of writing, finding anything in the sector that might be improved or is improving and treat it as something government should crush immediately, regardless of the results for people who are actually choosing in favor of this form of market participation. Do you think that that is a fair characterization of the argument we just read from the New York Times, that it is something that government should crush immediately? I don't think that's quite exactly what the Times is saying. The Times is definitely pointing out that there have been some lawsuits leveled at companies that have been settled. Lyft was not crushed by this $27 million payment. Legislation and lawsuits might ensure that traditional laws are applied to the gig economy, but even if they were advocating for this, it's not exactly a power. Yeah, I think that that's a fair characterization. The New York Times is pointing out that, well, the reality is different from the pitch. That seems to be the thesis of the New York Times, not that government should crush the gig economy. I think that's a false characterization. I think that is a straw man argument that is very easy to knock down. Who would want to argue against the idea that, yeah, government tyranny bad, right? Well, sure, government tyranny bad. Is that exactly what the New York Times is advocating? I don't think so. An editorial board as bad as this calls for a good fisking. What are you getting from his tone? How do you feel about Tucker's tone? What's a good fisking?
He has a lot of contempt for them, it seems like.
He seems very contemptuous. Also, fisking, not in the dictionary. Maybe it's a frisking is what he's trying to get at. Maybe it's dialectical. I don't know. What does fisking mean? I thought, like, when I read this, I just interpreted it as like a good like evisceration, right? A good like counterpoint. Fisking is a term invented by sections of the blogosphere. What? Opposed to the pro-Arab reporting of Robert Fisk? I don't even know what that means. What Urban Dictionary, what does that scholarly source say? The word is derived from articles written by Robert Fisk that were easily refuted and refers to a point-by-point debunking of lies and idiocies. Okay, thank you, Urban Dictionary. Don't know who Robert Fisk is, but sure. So, all right, using some non-standard language here, that's fine. I think I don't know what this word means, and I just kind of had to interpret it from context. I generally got the gist of the Fisk, but I would have liked, I didn't know that he was actually like using some language, right? There's no utopia at companies like Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and Handy, whose workers are often manipulated into working long hours. He says utopia is a pretty high standard against which to compare any existing reality. It's also presumptuous for any writer to presume people are being manipulated because they chose to work hard. Many, just like newspaper reporters, they desire success. This is, I just got so lost in the weeds with this sentence. This is not a grammatically correct sentence. Many, just like many newspaper reporters, they desire success. If we take out the parenthetical, it's many, they desire success, which we don't follow a subject with the pronoun of the subject. That's like not a thing that English sentences do. That just really bothered me. But the idea that you are not manipulated if you make a choice. I think there's more to the story there. Yes, I think it is broadly true that if you are, there's a lot of things to read, like I was saying, with my tutor.com stuff, and anytime you agree to be an independent contractor, there's a lot of documents to read and to understand. So in that sense, I think he does have a point. Once you enter freely into this business arrangement, into this contract, to an extent, you're not being manipulated. But if you're being told that you're going to make a lot of money, and as Katie describes, it's much harder than the advertisement for the service makes it appear, there's a case to be made that manipulation is at stake, right? It's not deductively true. It's not necessarily the case, but there's room to interpret here that I think that he is oversimplifying by saying, look, anytime you choose, then you can't be manipulated. That's essentially kind of what I'm getting out of this. It was just, I think that's way too strong. These companies have discovered that they can harness advances in software and behavioral sciences to old-fashioned worker exploitation, according to a growing body of evidence. And then we get some more storytelling, right? I think rather than take on the idea of exploitation, he tells us a story about exploitation. Imagine an Uber driver sitting at home binging on Netflix who suddenly realizes I could be out making money by driving people around the city, having great conversations, making people happy, getting drunk home safely. So he goes out in the town. This is what the Times calls exploitation. Do you think that this is a fair characterization of what the Times calls exploitation? I don't think so. I think what the Times is calling exploitation is the idea of misclassifying workers as independent contractors, denying them access to legally enforceable benefits and worker protections, and making people, giving people less protection than they would otherwise receive. That would seem manipulative and exploitative, if anything. Not this weird story about what Tucker imagines Uber drivers are like, right? Oh, who are Uber drivers? They're just sitting at home binging on Netflix. What is it? What kind of character, what do you feel about this theoretical Uber driver sitting at home binging on Netflix?
Not highly motivated.
Right. I'm getting, I think I'm being told a story where people who drive for Uber aren't necessarily highly motivated until they suddenly have an epiphany, apropos of nothing, that they could be out making money. Okay, that's a motive force. Katie, do you enjoy having great conversations, making people happy? Is that why you began door dashing? Maybe door dashing is an incorrect analogy there, right? Because you're not necessarily driving people around. I don't know. When I call an Uber, I'm not trying to talk to anybody.
Part of the gig economy, but at the same time, they're referring specifically to like the driving companies. But really, it's like they're both bringing up gig economy, which refers to other things such as delivery as well. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to with any of those gig economy type apps, you have a choice whether or not you want to work that day, how many hours you want to work. So in this article, it's like he's referring to like it's not exploiting if like the person's choosing when they want to work and how long they want to work. Mm-hmm. But so.
Well, and I think that there might be an equivocation here too, because like on the one hand, if you are getting to choose, in a relevant way, then you're not necessarily being manipulated in one sense, right? You're not necessarily being manipulated about how much you're going to be working if you are actually choosing to do it. And so it would seem like, on the other hand, the more important point that the Times seems like they're trying to make is about this classification for independent contractors. And that seems to be the big point that they're making about manipulation, which this is why I think, like, up to this point, what he calls his good fisking, I think, is like a lot of cherry picking and equivocation, and not actually really like addressing what this distinction between independent contractors and versus employers. And this is, I think, the worst example of this. Again, like, just have a couple of things here to touch on. Gig economy workers tend to be poorer and are more likely to be minorities than the population at large. Most said the money they earn from online platforms is essential or important. He says, I have no doubt, but the Times is blaming the solution, calling it the problem. People who need another source of income have one, thanks to the gig economy. Would they be better off or worse off without the opportunity? Parentheses, I'm embarrassed to have to make such rudimentary points here, but such is the current situation, right? Tell me about this tone. What do you think about this guy's tone? Do you find him, is this, and don't worry about offending me, right? I clearly don't like this guy's tone, but what is the objective thing that he's doing here?
I feel like he's just, I don't know how to say it. He's very casual and angry.
I think where you're sort of reaching hints where he's dismissive, right? He's saying that this idea. I'm embarrassed to have to bring up rudimentary points, right? This is the New York Times is getting their fundamentals incorrect, right? Like, they're just misattributing they're blaming a solution and calling it the problem. They're being ridiculous, right? And so there's this sense of, like, he's kind of indignant here, right? He's kind of dismissive. And, again, I don't think this is appealing to a broad audience. This is appealing to people who already believe that the New York Times is missing the point. He's not really appealing to you if you read this sentence and you think, what a gotcha moment. Like, yeah, this guy's like, he gets it, right? Like, the New York Times is just a bunch of lefty liberals, and they don't understand anything about the gig economy. They don't understand anything about economics. These are a bunch of people that are just freely choosing, how, like, this guy's doing a great myth busting event right now, right? I think on the one hand, this is like ethos building. It's humorous. It's like, oh, this silly New York Times, I'm reducing their argument to the absurd. Look how easily I'm dispensing with them. On the other hand, if you don't absolutely agree with this guy, I think it's very clear to read this as, like, almost on the point of arrogance. And like his tone really grates against me, because it doesn't feel like he's being fair at all, that he's not actually confronting anything that they're bringing up. He's got an ideology and he's driving that ideology, and he's letting that confirmation bias direct his criticism rather than actually confronting some of these points. And he does this again down here, right? My apologies for typing such obvious things, right? His tone is so dismissive that for me, he is establishing no ethos. Like, up until this point, I haven't even mentioned, what is Jeffrey A. Tucker's specific credentials? He doesn't anywhere invoke them. So the strength of his credibility and trustworthiness is purely through the story, the language that he's using. And so far, he's told me a story that seems incredibly exaggerated. It seems like he's mischaracterizing things. He's missing the point on a lot of stuff. And his tone is, quite frankly, like, really nauseating and dismissive. And so, like, he's not really appealing to me as somebody who I really want to pay attention to and imbue with a sense of authority. Now, on the other hand, I think the Times is being reasonable and plausible. I have some questions and criticisms of the way that they've characterized stuff. And I'm, not totally convinced that everyone's being exploited and manipulated, but I am concerned about this classification problem, which may or may not be at issue here. And, on that point, Tucker's completely silent. He quotes the language, right? Since workers for most gig economy companies are considered independent contractors, they do not qualify for basic protection. This helped Uber, which started grow to 700,000 employees. He completely misses the point here about this distinction. That Uber grew so fast under this model should tell us something. The conventional workplace is not working precisely because of the basic protections, and they are actually horrible burdens that don't either help workers or business owners. What these regulations do is diminish competition. The success of the gig economy is proof that the mark is crying to carry a lighter load. When you see success, that's a signal that you're doing something right. And I would say false cause. Correlation doesn't equal causation, my man. Like, just because Uber is being successful, maybe part of their success is they are not having to pay 700,000 people the equivalent that they should be paid. Maybe that is what's at stake because they've classified these people as independent contractors and non-employers, something that you don't address at all. Maybe there are more reasons that explain their spectacular success than just, this is just the market talking. Also, he has done nothing to give me any evidence that the market has actually produced this. He just is giving me a lot of ideology that all regulations are wrong and worker protections are horrible burdens. These are just a bunch of claims that are unsubstantiated. Like, you're just telling me a story that all regulations are bad. And like, I don't find that to be a compelling story. And like, if you want that to be a compelling story, you've got to give me a lot more evidence. You've got to demonstrate to me what precisely are the drawbacks to worker protections. Why are they not helpful, right? Show me those things and then I'll listen. But in place of any evidence, you're just giving me a snarky tone that, like, I don't know if you read the comments of this article, like, everybody everyone who agrees with this is like, yeah, give it to them. And it's like, there's no evidence here. There's just a bunch of storytelling. If you believe in this ideology from the start, then you're letting your confirmation bias confirm the story. You're not actually letting any, you're not responding to any of the actual evidence that's being presented in this article. You're just sort of ideologically reading some key language. And then the last point that I wanted to talk about, put on your decoder ring. Increasingly, workers and government agencies are pushing back. He says, put on your decoder ring. The term workers here means labor unions, whose only interest is in cartelizing the labor market for their benefit and at the expense of everyone else. I would say that there's no clear indication that workers necessarily means labor unions, right? New York Times mentions labor unions in other places. I don't know why he has detected a conspiracy to cloak labor union with otherwise the normal definition of the word worker. Okay, but let's go there. Workers mean labor unions, whose only interest is in cartelizing the labor market. What is a cartel? What does it mean to make something into a cartel? Where do you hear the word? Where are you familiar with hearing the word cartel?
Gang activity in like Mexico.
Drug cartels is probably the most readily intelligible or understandable. A cartel is to bring under the control of a cartel a written agreement between belligerent nations. All right, I'll see you later, Baylor. We're wrapping up right now. A combination of independent commercial or industrial enterprises designed to limit competition or fix prices. A combination of political groups for common action. This seems like the most readily interpretable idea that he's getting at here, is that why should you be against, what the real exploitation and unfairness is these labor unions fixing the price of labor unfairly for businesses, right? That's who we should feel sorry for here. The poor businesses who have to pay all this money out to their workers. How terrible of a situation. How dare workers demand money for the jobs that they do? This is not a very compelling line of argument to me. I see little indication that worker actually means labor union. I think this is a highly politicized definition that he's trying to push here. And I think he's definitely reading this in here. There's plenty of instances where the Times is actually talking about labor unions. And if you want to make the argument that labor unions are, market cartels, that's missing the point here. You just want me to believe that labor unions are cartels. I don't know. He seems to want to think that, the idea of basic protection which is related to labor unions, that basic protections are kind of like price fixing. Minimum wages are price fixes. In a way, yeah, that is a fixed price, but it, you know, whether or not you see that protection as like a barrier to doing business or a protection is largely ideological. And that's what the takeaway that I get from his argument here is his criticism is pure ideology. And there's almost no evidence that he's pointing to. Like, so his reasoning, like his appeal to rationality, like whether or not you see this as common sense, almost exclusively depends on if you see the world in these terms. Like if you already agree with his ideological underpinnings, then you might see this as like a ipso, like quid pro quo deductive argument, reducing the argument to the absurd, like the New York Times like owned, right? But if you don't absolutely define all of these things in this way, if you don't understand the world in the way of the story that he's telling you, then you are probably not seeing his logic totally in the same way. And also he's giving you a lot of language that you really have to look up. That he's using words like cartelizing, which like is not necessarily elegant. And you know, to be fair, there's a long history of labor in this country that, you know, might operate on terms of like being accused of being a cartel. There's corruption all over the place for sure, historically and contemporarily. But the point that I wanted to get at with Tucker here is that this criticism is storytelling, right? This is pathos, and the intimate relation between pathos, ethos, and logos here is that, you know, if you're already kind of on board, the story that you're being told almost becomes a substitute for like rational evidence, or, you know, a sense of rationality here. Whereas like here, I think there's actual evidence that we could discuss and, you know, talk about the validity of. The New York Times clearly is more on the side of workers than businesses, but even if that argument is ultimately driven ideologically, there's just more to talk about in this article than there is in Tucker's criticism. And Tucker's criticism, I think, can be reduced to like a lot of just cherry picking, a lot of just, you know, picking out things that he wants to attack and attacking them in a way that suits his interests, rather than like actually providing any evidence for anything or arguing in any way. We don't relate the idea of this article. You know, I'm not given really any information about Uber except that Uber means freedom. And I'm like, I just, you know, we disagree about the definition of freedom. Like, I would really like some evidence for what Uber is doing, for why it's not exploitative and manipulative, other than like a bunch of stories you're telling me about what motivates people to become Uber drivers, or what Uber means for an economy that is mired in the thicket of government regulations and things like that. So I don't particularly find this compelling, but maybe you do. On that note, I've gone 4 minutes over. It's not bad, all things considered. I get ahead of steam. I will go ahead and I'll